Hello! In this video, I'll just tell you a few words about the main highlights of these two articles. The links will be also found in the description. Would you wish to use an online translator and get references to all the sources used, because this video is based on mainstream sources exclusively, and it shows how difficult was it for them indeed to squeeze the actual historic findings in terms of sites and literature into the popular mainstream timeline of history, which again and again I have shown is not based on the historic findings and old books. Instead of that, it was ready-made, and then it was forced onto the scientific community. Those who wished to remain with the status of scientists, they had to somehow, whatever they find or discover, they had to squeeze it into this timeline or lose their jobs. And although these two articles deal with the pre-Christianity times in the history of the Slavic people, as they call them, in reality, as I have shown in a couple of the previous videos, in older times, the term Slavic people included most of the European nations, and only in recent modern times the term has been made to have a narrow meaning as a part of the implementation of the overall plan of divide and conquer. The most impressive part for me from the full material was a contemporary description of a Byzantine emperor who undertook a travel himself to meet the ruler Knyaz Svetoslav of the Slavic people. And the actual meeting took place at a riverbank. So, needless to say, the Byzantine emperor was dressed with gold fabrics, top to bottom, precious gemstones, and everything else, of course, accompanied by numerous guards and servants. And he was waiting for the king of the Slavic people, who, by the way, have defeated the Byzantine Empire a couple of times. And for that reason, the Byzantine emperor had to undertake the journey himself. But to his utter dismay, when the time of the meeting arrived, he saw a simple boat crossing the river. Few simple-looking men were paddling the boat. And to the absolute surprise of the Byzantine emperor, one of these simple men, who was also paddling along with the others, turned out to be the king. Not only the king participated in the manual work required by the situation at hand, namely paddling the boat, but also his outfit was in no way superior to that of the men who were accompanying him. So this happened at the times when the Slavic people lived freely, before Christianity was forced upon them. In certain regions, in order to force people to become Christians, they had to behead 3/4 of the population just to get 1/4 of the remaining people to somehow or other accept it, swallow it up. I think this by itself shows very well that Christianity was corrupted by the evil very soon after it came to existence. Even in its early stages, so much murder in the name of Christianity. I really doubt this has anything to do with the intention of Jesus Christ. So this scene, this episode with the modestly dressed king wasn't some exception, maybe some arrangement for the travel or anything like that. No, not at all. That was the rule. And it is confirmed by really mainstream excavations. Yeah, not all mainstream scientists are penguin. Some of them frankly wrote, when we excavate the settlements of the pre-Christian Slavic people, they write, we find no gap whatsoever between rich and poor. Even people whose social position or occupation would have made it very easy for them to hoard money, they apparently were not interested in hoarding, and they had a living standard like everybody else. For example, this is a quote from a foreign traveler who visited such settlements, Otton Bamberg. Not only he described the Slavic people as really nature people, but also he shared that they were surprised when they noticed that the foreigners lock their traveling boxes, the alternatives of the modern suitcases, where the travelers would have kept their precious belongings. The very concept of locking something as a way of protecting it from thieves, that was like an amusing idea for the Slavic people because they didn't have really experience with local theft, and the full idea of the theft as a phenomena sounded very weird for them. So the way the paid historians dealt with the problem of explaining this full situation is like this. Well, people at that time in those regions, they were like semi people. So basically, they were so dumb that they could not have yet discovered even the theft. Yeah, still hanging on their tails from the trees, which is of course absolutely not true. They had, for example, fine clothing, hundreds of fine garments made of silk, pure silk, were discovered in this type of settlements. Also, they had social structure, advanced social structure, which allowed them to even conquer a couple of times, defeat Istanbul. So this reveals very well that it is an absolute nonsense what they are telling us that this gap between rich and poor arose as a natural byproduct of the emancipation of the human society. This is just a lie which we are fed so that we can swallow it nowadays and believe that there is no option but to live with this gap. And so we continue voting for criminal politicians who pretend not to notice this major problem of the money hoarding. The evil of hoarding money is not about being rich. Actually, when we end up this criminal money hoarding, then all of us will be rich. Money hoarding is about possessing really unreasonable amount of riches, like many billions, and then this is being used to buy immunity against the law for common people. And with this type of money, they even managed to buy the position of lawmakers. And then we, the stupid sheep, we think that we live in democracy just because we are completely free to go to the store for toys and select the craziest or the sweetest looking puppet. We can choose whichever puppet we like, and that's why we think that we live in democracy and that we are free people because we have a free pass to the store for children's toys. And although most of the written records from that time, the pre-Christian, are of course nowhere to be seen, even from whatever the Christian occupators wrote down as memories of whom were they exterminating, even from that, even there we can find some pretty interesting stuff. about the social structure, which should have been a monarchy at that time, if the mainstream history, or at least its conclusions, are correct. But no, what the Christian chronicles describe is something completely different. Although the king had some ruling authority, it was not absolute. He was subservient to the council of elders, and in case he was not actually implementing the policies which these elders, which were in reality representatives of the clans, representatives of the real people, if he was not ruling according to the way people wanted, he was replaced by the council of the elders. So there was much more democracy actually back then, because now it has become a common practice for many presidents to take decisions which are against the will of the majority of the people of the country. So the Penguins always assure us that it was the church, the clergy, which was the center of education and, of course, of all writing and alphabets. And if it wasn't this super booper church, our monkey fur would never fall off. Let's see what kind of written records we have from pre-church time. And in the recent decades, thousands of such records have been excavated, and these are birch bark manuscripts. Interestingly enough, they were common both for the Slavic people and also for the Vedic societies, the Vedic cultures of nowadays India. Yet another aspect which shows the connection between them. In previous videos there were many other connections made. So from the dates written on these documents and the clearly pagan names and titles of the people who wrote them, there is no doubt these were pre-Christian written documents. Mostly these were simply letters which people from faraway places exchanged. One of them was even written by a 6-year-old. Many of them were written by women, which showed a very high rate of literacy amongst women in those times. Which of course the Penguins again forgot to include in history, because that's, that period is for monkeys, so where do you get literate women in those times? That doesn't match, so out of the history. But fortunately, some of the records of the actual excavations were published, so we know what they found at least. And by the way, the sheer volumes of such letters found is quite astonishing. Yep, most probably we haven't even found all of them naturally. So people were writing quite actively, and on the top they had a very well organized postal system over vast areas. And all that is in times when officially they were so dumb that they couldn't even get themselves together to stitch proper clothes, so they were wrapped in rugs. And as for literacy, they've never heard officially the word alphabet even. And what is the official explanation of all this postal system? Well, they have the story like this. Yes, the people who were corresponding, maybe they were not really like Christian, but you see, the postal service itself must have been run by Christians, because the rest is monkeys, how can they deliver to an address? But when they tell such stories to the history students, they again miss some details, like, for example, how could have a couple of monks, a dozen or so of them, organize the full postal service and writing the mail for quite few millions of people. And this organization would also include delivery to tens of thousands of remote villages. So this handful of monks, my God, what kind of mystic powers did they have? Because in modern times, thousands of postmen and postwomen are needed to do the same job, along with vehicles and even airplanes to carry the mail. So, in other words, this full story of the church bringing education and writing to the stupid pagans, that is just yet another lie to artificially inflate with helium the authority of the church, so that people will listen to the church. Yes, in modern times, wars are endorsed by the church. Ugly sexual perversions are also endorsed by some churches. And in general, the church serves very well to ensure the people just continue to be a good sheep and don't you worry about your soul. We will take complete care and control of your soul. Yeah? Now, let's see what was the situation with slavery. Again, a phenomena which, according to penguins, was again a product of the evolution of the human society and appeared on the historic scene when people were barbaric, the cruel pagan barbarian monkeys, of course, being the best candidates. So, how did Slavic people keep slaves? Descriptions were found in the old chronicles, and they were allowed to keep people that they called slaves only in case they were captured during battle from the enemies. They were not allowed to keep their own countrymen as slaves. But when it comes to the actual description of how were they treating these alleged slaves, it turns out that these were simply servants. And they had equal rights with the members of the Slavic society, which had the lowest rank. And during the time for which they were forced to remain as servants with a given family, they were treated as family members and not as cattle. So, although they say slaves, they actually had servants, and if somebody ended up in such position, it was for a given number of years, after which the war captive could choose whether he would want to remain, or he also could go back to his home country or settle elsewhere. He was a free person after this given number of years were over. And as far as real slavery in these lands, there was a lot of it, but we are not told, we are being confused with play of words, skillful renaming of things to obscure their essence. And whatever is now known as крепостное право in Russian or serfdom in English was in some cases nothing else but a full-fledged slavery. Now, everything I said earlier in this video probably refers to most of Europe, but this about the serfdom being, for all practical purposes, most cruel slavery keeping is definitely true for Siberia and Russia. where they had to apply extreme measures because entire regions over there were populated with people of a very high consciousness, and they had to lower it. Exactly as cruelly treated, beaten, abused animals bear the scars of such traumas, and gradually their mentality becomes crooked and twisted. In the same way, they lowered the level of the human consciousness in those regions using exactly this cruelty. People were sold, raped, treated much worse than cattle. And this was in no way a product of the gradual evolution of the human society, as they're telling us in those thick books in the libraries. This was something centrally organized and centrally carried out for a short period. In other lands, the forms of serfdom were much milder, and it would mostly express itself by the inability to relocate without the permission of the local duke or something like that. And the mildest forms of serfdom survived even modern times in the forms of all kinds of residence permits, even within given countries. But of course, that is being gradually abolished because it is simply an old-fashioned tactic of slave keeping. Now they focus on modern methods, which involve the slaves happily and absolutely voluntarily complying to stupid rules, which they consider democratic, or also carrying around devices which distribute the orders of the slave masters. Also, they report full details about us to the slave masters. And in addition, their working frequencies damage our nervous systems, which, along with the constantly broadcasted by these devices scenes of violence which traumatize us, these both factors are sufficient to constantly lower our consciousness even more. And all this is done in a seamless manner. When the next model of the slave device appears, people voluntarily wait for it days in a row. They sleep on the sidewalks to get hold of the next model the first day it appears on the market. True knowledge and freedom are qualities of goodness. They walk hand in hand. A true knowledge about our ancient history is not only gossiping about Anunnakis, it's also about understanding how did we end up where we are now. And one of the main driving forces, at least recently, has been this, although recent, yet very deeply rooted belief that electronics, gadgets, and technology based on such principle is the top crown jewel of development and progress. That's why most people will have difficulty comprehending how could have been the pagan people before Christian times actually more advanced than us if they didn't have electronic gadgets. The truth is that they were accomplishing most of the tasks for which we need electronics with practical daily magic. The evidence of that being the small remnants of shamanic knowledge which is still kept alive. The shamans in certain corners of the earth which are not yet completely devoured by the civilization of the smartphones, they have demonstrated many miracles even in our modern days. When the winds of change of time, the winds which change epochs, reach us, those who are tired of the civilization of the smartphones, they will be able to tune to the old vibrations of the people before Christianity, the people who didn't even know the concept of theft. The shamans of the nature people, they can travel also through time. They can reach even modern people who are interested in that old way of life of the nature people. Very often the first contact will be through the medium of the sacred plants or through the medium of sound, like this ancient vibration which the people of Asia kept for us. So when will the winds of change be upon us? This is very important to understand the timing. And the most important thing that I want to share with you in this video is what the ancient spirits showed to me about the timing. It's like this: those who wait for the change in the society to occur so that it will carry them as a tide towards heaven, this type of people may never even experience any change, even if it actually occurs and influences most other people around them, just because while waiting they remain tuned to the vibrations of the civilization of the cell phones. The truth is that the winds of change work on personal level only and on demand only. For those who are determined enough to get tuned to the ancient vibrations, for them the wind of change will start at the moment when they make that resolution. In some cases, their resolution will have the manifestation of a prayer or a solemn declaration in front of their altar and addressing their personal guardian angel and the universe. For others, that won't be needed anyway, because the resolution will start working the second they make it. And as the understanding of how to tune themselves to the ancient vibration grows, together with cleaning unnecessary beliefs picked up from the TV, the radio, or the smartphone individuals walking around, to the extent that happens, the circumstances of life of such person will also change correspondingly to resemble more and more the peaceful, harmonious environment of the nature people. For many, it will be changes in the living situation, or even possibly continuing one's life in another more beautiful dimensional timeline than in the one in which you hear this video, although the changes will manifest differently for different people according to their karmic luggage, their work will never go in vain. Even if the forces of evil blow up the earth, nothing will be lost, because the earth was fashioned as a field where the souls will come to show what can they create and to learn how to create better. We are not here to save the earth, which is only part of the theater props of the universe. What we perceive as solid matter around and what is understood by default to be the definition of reality by many is nothing else but the holographic manifestation of the thought forms of those who observe it.